Yes, I've been more than fair. I idealize them. Every woman I meet, I put up there.
So far, you haven't said anything that sounds even remotely clever.
Well, stick around. The next thing I noticed about...
There was a time when men across America wanted to be like Cary Grant, and women could not take their eyes off him. At the height of the 40s, Cary Grant was like a new storm in Hollywood. He was not just famous, he was the standard of charm. A smile that was cool, yet mesmerizing. But that was only what the world was allowed to see. Because behind that perfect suit and charming smile was a fractured life. A childhood of abandonment. A mother who disappeared without explanation. 5 marriages, and none of them lasted completely. Pain no one saw. Bitter tears. Wounds that were never allowed to show. And an obsessive fear that one day the whole world would realize he was just a man playing the role of himself. The more he became the ideal man, the further he drifted from his true self. The more he was desired, the lonelier he became. So who was Cary Grant really? A perfect Hollywood gentleman? Or a boy from Bristol who never escaped the feeling of being abandoned? This is the story of Cary Grant, a forgotten star, a hero stolen from Hollywood's memory. And the reason will send a chill down your spine. It is heartbreaking that the beginning of a legend started with lingering fear inside his own home. From a young age, the people the boy Cary Grant loved most crushed his heart. Cary Grant was born in 1902. Grant, whose real name was Archibald Archie Leach, came from Bristol. Grant's father, Elias, was an alcoholic who made clothes for a living. Grant moved to live with his grandmother, but she was also a drunk, so there he found no comfort either. And then the first tragedy struck when he was 13. His mother suddenly disappeared. He was told she had gone on a long vacation, only to discover many years later that she had been committed to a mental institution. His father remarried, leaving in the boy's mind a haze of secrets and unanswered questions. Desperate about his father, he clung to entertainment as an escape. He joined Bob Pender's troupe, a traveling comedy group where he learned mime juggling and comic timing. By the age of 14, after completely dropping out of school, Leach wandered around docks looking for work and tried to earn enough to buy a ticket out of England. He decided to join the Pender troupe and found it to be a place full of laughter people wearing all kinds of costumes and doing all sorts of clever tricks. They happily traveled everywhere and were carefree. They laughed, lived, and loved. Leach arrived in New York with vaudeville performers in the mid-1920s in search of fame. His good looks suited the light musical plays with a touch of romance in New York theaters. Before moving to Hollywood when vaudeville lost its appeal, Leach also made money selling ties on Broadway. In New York, Leach built good relationships with other performers like George Gracie Burns and Jack Benny. He understood that he had to change his name as well as learn to speak differently from his native accent to hide his lack of education. In New York, Grant met Fay Wray, the actress who had gained fame with the film King Kong, 1933. Grant stayed with her for many years and hoped to shine in Hollywood. Paramount saw potential in Grant, and in 1932, at the age of 28, Leach appeared in his first film under a new name, Cary Grant. And that name also marked the point where he buried his origins forever. Then Grant's career reached its peak after more than 20 roles in films such as The Philadelphia Story North by Northwest Notorious, His Girl Friday, To Catch a Thief, Bringing Up Baby, and The Bishop's Wife. However, it did not take long for that perfectly polished exterior to begin cracking under the weight of personal turmoil. Obsessed with being uneducated, Cary Grant tightly controlled his career. He always protected his image and turned down roles in The Third Man, A Star is Born, and Lolita. On set, Grant often drove colleagues crazy by constantly talking about costumes and camera angles. Despite having a fortune worth millions of US dollars, Grant lived frugally. He saved every penny, and it was said that guests visiting his house could find half-eaten bread in the refrigerator and buttons cut from old shirts before being thrown away. And Grant could be a generous friend and lover. but others had to meet his conditions. Grant went through many relationships and 5 failed marriages, but all who passed through his life could not endure him because he was not easy to live with. He was controlling, uncomfortable, in crowds somewhat solitary, liked to eat dinner in front of the TV, and had many other eccentric habits. Notably, Grant's greatest fear was being exposed as a fraud. Beneath all the glamour and polish, he was just an uneducated and unloved boy from Bristol. That made him live forever in the shadow of his pride and temper, and he spent many years in therapy to ease everything. He began experimenting with LSD in psychotherapy sessions with the help of Dr. Mortimer Hartman, and after more than 100 sessions that he considered life-changing, Grant finally stopped blaming his parents for what had happened to him. In a still very conservative society, openly talking about LSD was a shock. Studio executives feared audiences would turn away. But ironically, it made him a figure ahead of his time, a classic Hollywood gentleman supporting psychedelic therapy before the hippie culture even appeared. However, LSD was not the only storm in his life. He turned to dating to compensate for his inner wounds, but that approach backfired on him. Marriage scandals. Virginia Cherrill, 1934 to 1935. Grant's first marriage was to actress Virginia Cherrill, who had been married once before. The two met in 1932 at the premiere of Blonde Venus. On paper, it seemed like a match between two rising beautiful faces of Hollywood. He was 30 and she was in her early 20s. They looked like a fashionable couple perfect for the blossoming social scene. But from the beginning, something was not right. They married 2 years later in London and even honeymooned in Rome. Sadly, despite the romantic trip, the two divorced just over a year later, citing abuse and fear of what Grant might do to her because of rumors of his possessiveness. They married on February 9, 1934, and filed for divorce just over a year later, with Cherrill revealing humiliating details in court. She said he hit her, that he tried to stop her from seeing friends, that behind the elegant suits and sharp lines, Cary Grant was a harsh partner always simmering with suspicion. He countered that she was overly sensitive, that she exaggerated trivial matters, that the accusations were untrue. But the press-sensing scandal spread every sordid detail, how she left with a settlement of $50,000, how the judge seemed sympathetic to her situation, how fans now had to reconcile these revelations with the man they loved on screen. While that story was still simmering, Grant fell into a second marriage ripe for tabloids. Barbara Hutton, 1942 to 1945. After his first divorce, Grant married philanthropist and socialite Barbara Hutton after meeting her on a sea voyage from New York to England in 1939. According to many sources at the time, it was love at first sight for the happy couple, often called Cash and Carrie, because she was extremely wealthy. Grant denied it. He insisted he requested a prenuptial agreement to protect Hutton's assets, that he did not take her money and paid his own share. But the press clung to the idea that it was a marriage of convenience, especially since Hutton was known for her lavish lifestyle and unstable psychology. They married in 1942, quickly becoming a luxurious couple attending high-class events. However, that fairy tale lasted only 3 years before divorce due to Grant's busy schedule and Hutton's drug addiction. The problem was not her, Grant said. People could not separate her from her money, and they behaved like fools around her. Even after divorcing Barbara Hutton, Grant maintained a close relationship with her son Lance, despite her remarrying 4 more times. The philanthropist said that although their relationship had ended, she still considered him the husband I loved most. Betsy Drake, 1949 to 1962. Not only was it Grant's longest marriage with Betsy Drake, but she was also his co-star. After meeting in 1947 on the Queen Mary ship, the couple had a passionate romance. Despite a 20-year age gap, he was 45 and she was 26 at the time of marriage. They dated for 2 years before marrying on Christmas Day, 1949. For a time, they enjoyed happiness and even starred together in films Every Girl Should Be Married, 1948, and Room for One More, 1952. But things began to deteriorate 5 years later. After meeting Sophia Loren on the set of The Pride and the Passion in 1957, Grant began an affair with her while still married to Drake. During that time, Drake was also writing the screenplay for Houseboat 1958, a film she intended to star in with her husband. However, after learning about the affair, Drake withdrew from the role and Loren was cast instead. It is believed this was the reason they eventually separated in 1962. During their marriage, Drake introduced Grant to lysergic acid diethylamide (LSD) therapy, a substance that was legal at the time. In 1959, Grant gave an interview and shared his feelings about the drug, saying, "Finally, I have almost achieved happiness. I wanted to get rid of all my hypocrisies." He explained, "I wanted to overcome childhood traumas, my relationship with my parents and former wives. I did not want to spend years in psychoanalysis." Diane Cannon, 1965 to 1968. After that, he married Diane Cannon in 1965. She was 3 decades younger, radiant, and ambitious. At first, it was a glamorous love, but it quickly cracked. Cannon accused him of controlling everything from clothes schedule to diet. She believed LSD made him deeper, but also more unpredictable. In 1966, daughter Jennifer Grant was born his only child. For a moment, it seemed he had found family happiness. But just a year later, they entered a tense divorce. The custody battle became the center of media attention. In the end, they reached joint custody, but his image continued to suffer. Barbara Harris, 1981 to 1986. Grant's 5th and final marriage was to actress Barbara Harris. They married in April 1981. He was 77 and she was 30. They lived together until Grant passed away. Cary Grant, the silver screen legend, and the deeply tragic same-sex love story. What has kept the story around Cary Grant from ever truly settling is not just the glow of the silver screen, but also the dark corners of his private life that Hollywood spent decades trying to cover up. One of the most controversial parts is the same-sex relationship mentioned again in the documentary Women He's Undressed, a film exploring the life of costume designer Ori Kelly, who was said to have been deeply involved with Grant during his difficult early years trying to build a career. The way the film suggests it, this was not just a story of friendship, but possibly a romantic relationship forced to live in the shadows of an era that did not allow people like them to live openly as themselves. According to the memories retold, Archibald Leach at that time was still just a poor young performer, not yet the Cary Grant the world would later know. He was thrown out of his place because he could no longer pay rent, carrying his few belongings in a small tin box, then went to Ori Kelly's studio in New York's West Village to ask for a place to stay. It was Kelly who took him in during that unstable period. He not only gave Leach shelter, but was also said to have paid for medicine when the young man became ill and had to undergo treatment for quite a long time. At that point, Leach was still doing odd jobs for a circus troupe touring from England to America. After recovering, he helped Kelly sell fashion items and accessories as a way of repaying him. Within a few years, the two were even making money from a small business together. From the outside, it may have looked like nothing more than two people struggling through hard times side by side. But through the lens of the documentary, it also carries the tone of a bond deeper than that. Director Gillian Armstrong once said that in those days, there was always pressure forcing people to live a normal and healthy life by society's standards. That is also the key to understanding why the story around Cary Grant and Ori Kelly feels so haunting. Kelly, 7 years older than Grant, was described as someone who did not want to hide his sexuality behind a sham marriage. Archibald Leach, meanwhile, was an ambitious young man drawn toward fame, beautiful women, and the glamorous world of New York artists. Kelly once wrote that Leach was always crazy about blondes and wealthy social circles, yet in the end, he still came home to him. That detail is exactly what makes this relationship, if it truly existed as a love story, feel so sad, intimate, dependent, but never secure. According to that version of the story, the age gap, the difference in personality, and most of all, Leach's ambition to change his life, gradually pulled the two apart. In 1931, when he signed his first contract with Paramount and began to be reborn as Cary Grant, his life turned in another direction. From that point on, his bond with Ori Kelly was also said to have gradually come to an end. Some accounts say that because of arguments related to Leach's womanizing, Kelly suggested that he move in with actor Randolph Scott. And that later period of living with Scott went on to ignite a wave of speculation that lasted for decades. The intimate photographs of Grant and Scott in Malibu, with their easy smiles and natural closeness, kept the public talking endlessly at the time. In the end, no one ever got an absolute answer about Cary Grant. But perhaps it was that very silence, ambiguity, and pain that made this chapter of his life both so tragic and so haunting. The sudden death in Iowa, the shocking ending of a legend. On November 29, 1986, Cary Grant was in Davenport, Iowa, preparing for an event called A Conversation with Cary Grant. That detail alone creates a strange feeling when looking back. One of the most elegant faces in Hollywood history, the man who once moved across the screen as if he never had to hurry, was now appearing in a small Midwestern city to tell stories, answer questions, and meet audiences like a legend who had long since left the soundstage behind. It was not a red carpet, not camera flashes, not a grand premiere. It was a smaller stage, quieter, more intimate. Yet it was also there in that seemingly peaceful place that Cary Grant's final chapter suddenly came to a close. That morning, Grant began to feel unwell. He was dizzy, nauseated, and showing signs of unusual exhaustion. A local doctor was called to examine him and advised him to go to the hospital right away. But true to Cary Grant's almost instinctive self-control, he refused. It seems that in his mind at that moment, the schedule still mattered, the appearance still had to be prepared for, and his body was still something he could control. Looking back, that decision makes the whole event even more painful. Because it shows that even in a life or death moment, Grant still behaved like the man the public had been used to seeing for decades, calm, confident, not quick to surrender to his own physical collapse. But by evening, his condition had clearly worsened. Barbara Harris, his fifth wife, understood that it could not be delayed any longer. She had no choice but to take him to St. Luke's Hospital. On the way there, Cary Grant suffered a severe stroke. The medical team tried to save him, but the damage was too serious. At 11:22 p.m., Cary Grant died at the age of 82. The way he died stunned the entire country, not only because it was so sudden, but also because of the almost total contrast between that death and the image he had left in the public memory. A man who seemed like he would never grow old, a man who once made all of Hollywood believe that style could be a permanent condition, ultimately died of a stroke in a hospital in Iowa, far from Beverly Hills, far from every glamorous symbol once attached to his name. That sense of unreality hung over the public response in the days that followed, because Cary Grant had never seemed like the kind of star people could easily imagine fading away. He did not carry the withered look of an outdated legend. He was not associated with declined public tragedy or a long drawn-out final act under the lenses of the press. On the contrary, he always seemed to maintain a very unusual distance from the weakness of old age. Even in his 80s, he still appeared in many people's eyes as a symbol of polish, of bearing of a Hollywood era, when men wore suits as part of their character and not just as costume. So when the news of his death appeared, the shared feeling was not just sadness. It felt like a break in America's cultural memory, as if a door leading into classic Hollywood had just closed without warning. News outlets immediately replayed his most famous film clips. Audiences once again saw Cary Grant in the roles that made him a legend, effortless, sharp, charming, almost unreal in his perfection. Tributes from colleagues also appeared quickly. People remembered his elegance, his intelligence, his command of comic timing, and the kind of magnetism that could not be copied. For many older viewers at the time, Cary Grant's death was not just the loss of an actor. It felt like another final piece of Golden Age Hollywood had been taken away. Those who had once watched him trade lines with Rosalind Russell spar with Katharine Hepburn or stand beside Ingrid Bergman understood that they were not just losing a star. They were losing a standard. And yet, true to Cary Grant, the man, there was no superstar farewell after his death either. No state funeral for the movies, no lavish memorial, no send-off staged like the final scene of a silver screen legend. Grant had previously left very clear instructions. He did not want a large funeral, did not want elaborate rituals, did not want to be sent off in the way the public might expect from an icon of that size. His body was cremated. His ashes were divided into several parts. One part was scattered off the California coast. Another part was placed on his estate in Beverly Hills. Barbara Harris and his daughter Jennifer Grant handled the arrangements in an atmosphere that was quiet, simple, and almost removed from every emotional stage the press might have exploited. If you look closely, the way Cary Grant left, this world was actually very consistent with the way he lived most of his life. He was an enormous star, but he never completely belonged to the crowd. He knew how to stand in the light, but he also knew how to keep the most private part of himself to himself. Even at the end, he still refused to turn his death into one final performance. But if his passing took place in silence, the questions about him did not go quiet at all. On the contrary, only days after he died, all the layers of mystery that had clung to Cary Grant for decades began to come alive again. The media did not only revisit the glorious roles, they also reopened the old files on his private life all at once. Television programs replayed interviews in which Grant spoke about LSD and psychotherapy with a candor that had shocked the public in the late 1950s. Other articles brought back the story of Randolph Scott, the relationship that had produced one of the most enduring question marks in classic Hollywood. At the same time, his failed marriages were examined again, to especially the accounts from former wives who described a Cary Grant who was controlling, distant, and sometimes made the people living with him feel more suffocated than loved. Diane Cannon, the woman with whom he had his daughter Jennifer, did not try to erase that complexity. She simply called him a complicated man. It was a short phrase, but it almost captured Cary Grant: completely charming, intelligent, elegant, yet not easy to grasp, and even harder to live with. Jennifer Grant chose silence. That silence was also striking. She did not rush to deny anything, nor did she confirm any of the rumors. She kept a dignified, calm distance, as if she understood that her father was the kind of person who only became more impossible to contain the more people tried to explain him. And in truth, that is exactly what happened. Cary Grant's death did not close the mystery around him. It only gave that mystery more life. When a person is still alive, the public still hopes that one day there will be a final answer. But once that person is gone, every empty space immediately turns into legend. That is why the more people look back on Cary Grant's whole life, the more they realize this was never a one-layer legend. It was many people stacked on top of each other. A boy from Bristol growing up starved of affection. A young man who invented himself through the stage and ambition. A film icon who turned elegance into a standard. A man who carried deep private anxieties all the way to the end of his life. And finally, a legend who did not leave to the sound of grand music, but with a silence that was almost chilling. Perhaps that is also why Cary Grant remained with people for so long after 1986. Not only through film, but through the feeling that beneath all that glow, there was still a part of him Hollywood never truly managed to decode. Cary Grant is an unresolvable paradox. Looking back at the entire life of Cary Grant, what keeps him alive is not just his acting talent or a style no one could imitate. What keeps him from ever disappearing from Hollywood's memory lies in the fact that he always went beyond every simple definition. He was a poor boy who grew up in Bristol, carrying a deprived childhood and the pain of abandonment. Yet he created for himself a level of elegance on screen that was almost flawless. He was a symbol of romance, of mature charm, of the kind of man who made people believe that love could be both intelligent and refined. But behind that image was a series of failed marriages and relationships filled with tension. He was once suspected of being a gold digger when he married one of the richest women in the world. Yet he repeatedly insisted that he never touched his wife's wealth. He was rumored to have feelings for men, yet he married 5 times. He was the face of classic Hollywood, yet he stepped into LSD therapy like someone ahead of the counterculture wave. He belonged to the screen, yet he chose to walk away from the spotlight, retreating into fatherhood, living quietly, and controlling the rest of his life in his own way. Cary Grant is not immortal because he was perfect. He is immortal because he was both charming and impossible to grasp. He made audiences laugh, dream, admire, and then left behind a question that is not easy to answer. Beneath the most elegant suit in Hollywood, was there truly a man at peace, or just a boy who never stopped feeling unloved? Perhaps it is precisely because no one has ever fully decoded Cary Grant that Hollywood has never truly said goodbye to him.
This content is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Thoughtfully compiled from public archives, historical records, and classic articles. While we strive for accuracy and balanced storytelling, some details from Hollywood's golden age remain unconfirmed and should be treated as speculative. We encourage viewers to draw their own independent conclusions. If this journey through Hollywood's shadows resonated with you, please leave a gentle like and subscribe with the bell icon so you never miss our next chapter. To continue uncovering the forgotten tragedies of the Golden Age, simply select the video on your screen right now. Thank you for keeping their memories alive.